All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating and honestly most intense periods in India's entire freedom struggle, the years between 1929 and 1942. Now, this was not some straight shot to independence, not at all. It was more like a cycle, an incredible rhythm of massive struggle followed by a fragile truce and then exploding back into defiance. This was a time when the very goal of the movement got a radical makeover, when something as simple as salt became a weapon of revolution, and when the debates inside the movement were just as fiery as the fight against the British. So let's get into it and see exactly how this pivotal chapter unfolded.
Just let that sink in for a second. This is Mahatma Gandhi, the man we associate with nonviolence, saying sedition has become my religion. That is a powerful, almost shocking statement. And what it tells you is that the game had completely changed. The time for just writing polite letters and hoping for the best, that was long gone. The movement was stepping into a phase where defying the colonial government wasn't just a political strategy anymore, it was a moral imperative, a spiritual duty. This quote, it's the perfect kickoff for the Civil Disobedience Movement, a nationwide rebellion that was about to shake the British Empire to its very core.
But before you can launch a nationwide struggle, you kinda have to agree on what you're struggling for, right? And for years, the main goal was something called dominion status. But as the 1920s wrapped up, a new, much bolder idea started catching fire. And this wasn't just some minor tweak in policy. No, this was a complete reimagining of what freedom even meant. It was a shift from trying to negotiate for a better seat within the empire to demanding a clean, total break from it.
And this slide right here lays out that divide perfectly. On one side, you've got the older, more senior leaders. Their goal was dominion status. You can think of it like Canada or Australia at the time. You govern yourselves, but you're still, part of the British family. But then, look at the other side. You can feel the energy from the younger generation, leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. They weren't having any of it. They wanted Poorna Swaraj, complete independence, no strings attached. This wasn't just a different choice of words. This was the difference between asking for a reform and demanding a revolution.
So you might be wondering, how did this huge shift happen so quickly? Well, it all started in 1928. Congress basically threw down the gauntlet and gave the British a one-year ultimatum: grant us dominion status or else. The British response, though, was a massive blunder. Viceroy Irwin came out with this super vague, wishy-washy declaration that promised, well, not much of anything. It was seen as a total slap in the face. And that rejection just poured fuel on the fire. 2 months later, at the historic Lahore Congress Session, with Nehru leading the charge, they made it official. Poorna Swaraj was now the goal. And to make it real, to make every Indian feel it, they declared January 26, 1930 as the very first Independence Day, a day for the whole country to take a pledge to fight for freedom.
Okay, so the goal is set, Poorna Swaraj. But now comes the million-dollar question. How do you actually get there? How do you get millions of people involved in this massive, nonviolent fight? This is where Gandhi's political genius really shines. He knew he had to take this big, abstract idea of complete independence and turn it into something simple, something tangible, that every single person, from the richest to the poorest, could understand and do. And he found the perfect symbol in the most ordinary of things: salt. This is where the struggle phase really begins. 240 miles, just think about that. For 24 days, Gandhi and his small band of followers just walked. But this was so much more than a walk. It was a masterpiece of political theater. Every village they stopped in became a rally. Every step they took spread the message of civil disobedience. The world's media was hooked. What some British officials first laughed off as a silly publicity stunt quickly became this global spectacle, a powerful image of an entire nation literally walking towards its freedom.
And what's amazing is that none of this was improvised. It was a brilliant multi-step strategy. First, Gandhi sends Viceroy Irwin a list of 11 demands. They were designed to appeal to everyone, and buried in that list was the demand to get rid of the salt tax. Why salt? Because the British monopoly on it hurt everyone, especially the poor. It was the perfect symbol of colonial greed. When the Viceroy, just as expected, blew him off, the trap was sprung. The march was on. And Gandhi kicking up that first lump of natural salt from the beach, that was the signal. That was the green light for the entire country to start breaking the law. And when that signal was given, the country just erupted. It was like a spark hitting a powder keg. As you can see, it happened everywhere. People were marching to make salt in Tamil Nadu and Malabar. In Bihar, there was a massive campaign to not pay the hated Chakadari tax. In the central provinces, people started defying the restrictive forest laws.
And way up in Peshawar, you had this incredible movement led by Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the frontier Gandhi, and his army of non-violent red shirts. The resistance there was so strong that a platoon of Hindu soldiers actually refused orders to fire on the unarmed Muslim crowds. An absolutely stunning moment of unity.
So, with tens of thousands of people in jail and the country in open revolts, the British government was seriously shaken. They finally realized that they couldn't just beat this movement into submission. And that brings us to the truce phase of the cycle. The British decided it was time to change tactics. It was time to talk. They released Gandhi from prison and invited the Indian National Congress for talks in London. Think about that. The very people they'd branded as criminals were now being asked to pull up a chair at the empire's negotiating table.
So these talks led to what's known as the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. It was a deal. The government agreed to let a lot of the nonviolent prisoners go and ease up on some of their harsh rules. In exchange, Congress agreed to press pause on the Civil Disobedience Movement and actually show up for the next big conference in London. But, and this is a huge but, this was a truce, not a surrender. It was a temporary timeout, and it was a controversial one too. Irwin flatly refused to hold an inquiry into police brutality, and critically, he refused to stop the execution of the revolutionaries Bhagat Singh and his comrades, which was a major point of contention.
And this table here gives you the scorecard for those conferences. The first one, well, Congress boycotted it, so it was like trying to have a wedding without the bride or groom, pretty much pointless. The second one was the main event, with Gandhi himself there representing Congress, but it completely stalled out. The big sticking point was the British plan for separate electorates, which was basically a system to divide voters by religion. Gandhi saw it as a transparent attempt to break Indian unity, and he wouldn't budge. He came home with nothing. After that, Congress didn't even bother showing up for the third one, and the whole thing fizzled out.
That failure in London was really the death of the truce. Back in Britain, a new, more hardline government took over, and they sent a new viceroy to India who was determined to crush any future protests. So when Congress tried to restart civil disobedience, the government was ready. They cracked down, and they cracked down hard. But the failure wasn't just about the British. It also brought some deep divisions within Indian society and even within the nationalist movement itself right out into the open.
And then came this bombshell. In August 1932, the British Prime Minister just went ahead and announced the Communal Award. This expanded that system of separate electorates. But here was the most explosive part. They decided to apply it to the depressed classes who we know today as Dalits. To nationalists like Gandhi, this was the ultimate divide-and-rule strategy. He was terrified that it would permanently splinter Indian society and create a formal division within the Hindu community itself.
Gandhi's reaction was extreme. From his jail cell, he announced he would fast until death unless this part of the award was reversed. This put an incredible amount of pressure on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the leading voice for the depressed classes. Ambedkar had argued that separate electorates were the only way to guarantee real political representation for his people. It was a clash of two powerful visions. In the end, after frantic negotiations, they hammered out a compromise, the Poorna Pact. The separate electorates for the depressed classes were gone. Instead, the number of seats reserved for them in the general system was almost doubled. The immediate crisis was over, but it laid bare just how complex the path to freedom was going to be.
And all this turmoil led to a major debate inside Congress itself, which you can see perfectly laid out here. On one side, you have Gandhi's strategy, which you could call struggle, truce, truce. He believed that people couldn't sustain a mass protest forever. You needed to have periods of truce, of rest, to regroup and build strength. But on the other side, you had the young, leftist wing, people like Nehru and Bose. Their strategy was simpler: struggle, victory. For them, any truce was a betrayal, a loss of momentum. They wanted to keep the pressure on relentlessly until the final victory. It was a fundamental disagreement. Do you play the long game, or do you go for broke?
And this quote from Nehru, talking about an open conspiracy, just nails the mindset of that leftist wing. See, for them, freedom wasn't just about kicking the British out. The open conspiracy was to create a brand new India, a socialist, republican India, an India that would challenge the old power structures of princes, landlords, and big business. Their goal wasn't just to change the flag, it was to completely transform the society.
Now, as if things weren't complicated enough, the world was about to be plunged into World War II. And when that happened, in 1939, it changed everything. Suddenly, Great Britain was in a desperate fight for its own survival, and it needed India's help, its soldiers, its resources, everything. This huge shift in the global power dynamic set the stage for one last big attempt at a deal before the next great struggle began.
The crisis kicked off with one incredibly arrogant move. The Viceroy of India declared that India was at war with Germany, without bothering to ask a single Indian leader what they thought. For the Indian National Congress, which was actually running governments in several provinces at the time, this was the ultimate insult. How could you claim to be fighting a war for democracy in Europe while denying that same democracy to India? It was a total contradiction. When the British refused to promise independence after the war, all the Congress ministries resigned in protest. They drew a line in the sand.
So by 1942, the war is going really badly for the Allies, and Britain gets desperate. They send a politician named Sir Stafford Cripps to India with a new proposal. But, as always, the devil was in the details. They offered Dominion status, but only after the war was over. They said any province could choose not to join the new India, which to Congress looked like a green light for partition. And crucially, for the entire duration of the war, Britain would keep 100% control over India's defense. Basically, Britain was asking India to give them everything for the war effort in exchange for a vague promise of a potentially fractured country at some unknown point in the future.
Well, Gandhi's response was instant, and it was brutal. This quote is legendary. He called the offer a post-dated check on a crashing bank. Let's break that down. A post-dated check, it's a promise to pay you later. On a crashing bank, Britain was losing the war so badly, there was a real chance they wouldn't even be around to honor that check. The whole offer was seen as too little, too late. The time for Dominion status was over, the hint of partition was insulting, and the refusal to hand over any real power right then and there was the final nail in the coffin. The Cripps Mission was a spectacular failure.
So, with the failure of the Cripps Mission, the door for any kind of negotiation slammed shut. That whole cycle of struggle, truce, struggle, it had run its course. Britain had made its offer and it had been completely rejected. The Indian leaders felt betrayed and the people were growing more and more impatient. And all of this was happening while a world war against fascism was raging, which only made the fight against imperialism at home feel that much more urgent. So, with every other path blocked, the stage was set for the final, decisive, all-or-nothing confrontation of this era, the Quit India movement. The question was no longer if another struggle would happen, but just how massive this final push for freedom would be.